Western European dragon. This is the one you already have in your head right now, and that is exactly the problem, because familiarity has made you underestimate just how terrifying the original concept actually was. Before Hollywood gave it orchestral soundtracks and CGI scales, the Western European dragon was the single most feared symbol in medieval mythology. A massive winged reptile with bat-like membranes stretched across limbs the size of ship masts, a body covered in armor-like scales that no sword could pierce, and a throat that could turn an entire village into charcoal in a single breath. We are talking about a creature that occupied the same psychological space in the medieval European mind that nuclear weapons occupy in ours. It was the ultimate catastrophe with a pulse. The earliest literary records of this archetype go back to the Anglo-Saxon poem Beowulf, composed somewhere between the 7th and 10th centuries, where an unnamed dragon guards a hoard of treasure in a burial mound and destroys an entire kingdom when a single golden cup is stolen from it. One cup. That is the level of pettiness we are dealing with. But the dragon did not care about the cup. It cared about the principle, and that is the key to understanding the Western European model, because this dragon is not just a giant lizard with a flamethrower for a mouth. It is the embodiment of possessiveness taken to its most extreme and destructive conclusion. Every coin in its hoard represents something it will kill to keep, and every knight who approaches represents something it will enjoy destroying. The wingspan of a classical Western European dragon in most depictions ranges from 15 to 30 meters, which means if one of these things flew over a football field, it would cast a shadow from one end zone to the other. Its fire could reach temperatures that, according to some medieval bestiaries, melted stone itself. Not wood, not cloth. Stone. That is not an animal. That is a geological event with an attitude. And then Tolkien came along and gave this archetype its most refined modern incarnation. Smaug the Golden from The Hobbit, published in 1937, is arguably the most famous dragon in English literature, and Tolkien designed him with surgical precision. Smaug is intelligent. He speaks. He manipulates. He knows every single item in his treasure hoard so intimately that when Bilbo steals a single cup, a direct callback to Beowulf, Smaug notices immediately. He does not just guard wealth. He catalogues it. He sleeps on it. He has turned gold into a bed, which is either the most decadent thing in literary history or the most uncomfortable, depending on your perspective. What makes Smaug terrifying is not his size or his fire. It is his vanity. He is a creature of absolute arrogance who genuinely believes he is invulnerable. And the tragedy is that he is almost right. His underbelly is coated in gems and gold from centuries of lying on his hoard, creating a kind of improvised armor. And the only reason he dies is because of a single missing scale on his left breast, a flaw so small that only a thrush could spot it and only one arrow in the world could hit it. The Western European dragon is the mythology of hoarding, of greed made flesh, of the idea that if you accumulate enough power and enough treasure and enough fear, you become something less than human and more than mortal. It is the villain that civilization invented to remind itself what unchecked ambition looks like when it stops pretending to be civilized. But greed does not always start with fire and wings. Sometimes it starts with a man, a pile of gold, and a slow transformation that strips away everything human piece by piece. Norse dragon. Fafnir is not born a dragon. That is the detail that changes everything about the Norse model, because in every other tradition, the dragon simply exists as a creature, a beast, a force. In Norse mythology, the dragon is something you become. Fafnir starts as a dwarf, one of 3 sons of Hydra, a figure in the Volsunga saga, one of the foundational texts of Norse literature compiled in the 13th century from much older oral traditions. The story begins when the gods Odin, Loki, and Hoenir accidentally kill Fafnir's brother Otr, who had taken the shape of an otter. As compensation, the gods are forced to fill Otr's skin with gold, and they do. Using treasure they extort from another dwarf named Andvari. But Andvari places a curse on the gold before he gives it up. Every single person who possesses it will be destroyed by it. And then the curse starts working. Fafnir murders his own father to take the gold. He refuses to share a single coin with his surviving brother Regin. He takes the treasure to a desolate heath called Hydra and lies on top of it. And over time, slowly, horribly, his body changes. His skin hardens. His form stretches. His mind narrows until the only thought left is the gold beneath him. He becomes a dragon. Not through magic in the flashy, cinematic sense, through obsession. The Norse dragon is a psychological diagnosis dressed in scales. Fafnir's transformation is the oldest metaphor in Germanic literature for what happens when a person lets a single desire consume every other part of their identity. You stop being a father, a brother, a member of a community. You become the thing you hoard. The physical monstrosity is just the outside catching up with the inside. And then comes Sigurd, the greatest hero of Norse legend, who is manipulated by Regin, Fafnir's own brother, into killing the dragon. Sigurd digs a pit along the path Fafnir uses to crawl to the river and waits beneath the earth with his sword Gram. When the dragon passes overhead, Sigurd drives the blade upward into its belly. Fafnir dies, but not before speaking. He warns Sigurd that the gold will destroy him too, and it does. The curse continues through generations, fueling betrayals, murders, and the eventual downfall of entire bloodlines. The Norse dragon is not a monster you slay and walk away from. It is a disease you catch the moment you touch the treasure. The gold is the real dragon. The scales are just a costume. If the Norse dragon is greed made flesh through slow corruption, the Greek world had a different idea entirely. What if the monster could not be killed at all? Greek dragon. The Hydra of Lerna is the ancient world's answer to the question of what happens when brute force meets a problem designed to punish brute force. In Greek mythology, the Hydra is a serpentine water dragon that lives in the swamps near the lake of Lerna in the Argolid region of the Peloponnese. Ancient sources vary on the exact number of heads. Apollodorus says 9, Diodorus Siculus says 100, and some early vase paintings show as few as 5, but the number is not the point. The mechanism is the point. Cut off one head and 2 grow back in its place. Think about that for a second. Every act of violence against this creature doubles the problem. Every swing of the sword makes it stronger. The Hydra is not a monster you fight. It is a monster that fights the concept of fighting. It weaponizes your own aggression against you. Heracles, the strongest man in Greek mythology, a demigod who had already strangled the Nemean lion with his bare hands, faced the Hydra as his second labor and quickly realized that muscles were not enough. He needed a strategy. His nephew Iolaus came up with the solution. After Heracles cut each head, Iolaus cauterized the stump with a burning torch before new heads could sprout. Fire sealed the wound. Violence plus intelligence equaled victory, but barely. The central head, the immortal one, could not be killed at all. Heracles had to bury it under a massive rock and just hope for the best, which is the ancient Greek equivalent of putting a problem in a drawer and pretending it does not exist. The Hydra's blood, by the way, was so toxic that Heracles dipped his arrows in it afterward, creating the deadliest weapons in Greek mythology, weapons that would eventually cause his own death decades later when the blood was used to poison him. Even in death, the Hydra kept multiplying consequences. The Greek dragon tradition includes other serpentine figures like Ladon, the 100-headed dragon that guarded the golden apples of the Hesperides, and Python, the enormous serpent slain by Apollo at Delphi. But the Hydra stands alone because it introduced a concept that would echo through storytelling for 3,000 years. The idea that some problems cannot be solved by hitting them harder, that some threats are systemic, that some monsters are not creatures but patterns, and the only way to break the pattern is to change your approach entirely. Now, take that idea of a serpentine monster of terrifying scale and transplant it to ancient Japan, where the dragon grows 8 heads and the hero is a god who gets it drunk before the fight even starts. Japanese dragon. Yamata no Orochi is excess-made mythology. Described in the Kojiki, Japan's oldest surviving historical chronicle, completed in 712 AD, this creature is an 8-headed, 8-tailed serpent, so enormous that its body stretches across 8 valleys and 8 hills simultaneously. Its eyes are described as red as winter cherries. Moss and cypress trees grow on its back. Its belly is perpetually inflamed and bleeding. This is not a dragon. This is a landscape that decided to become hostile. The story of Yamata no Orochi begins when Susanoo, the storm god who had just been banished from heaven for bad behavior, encounters an elderly couple weeping beside a river. They tell him that every year an 8-headed serpent comes and devours one of their daughters, and they are down to their last one, a beautiful girl named Kushinada Hime. 7 daughters gone, 1 left. So Sanu immediately agrees to help, partly because he is a god with a violent streak who enjoys a challenge, and partly because he wants to marry Kushinada Hime, which is a very specific kind of heroic motivation. His plan is not elegant, but it is effective. He instructs the couple to brew sake, a massive quantity of it, and to build a fence with 8 gates, each gate leading to a platform with a vat of sake on it. When Yamata no Orochi arrives, it plunges all 8 heads into the 8 vats and drinks until it passes out. Susanoo then hacks it to pieces while it sleeps. Inside the creature's body, he discovers a legendary sword called Kusanagi no Tsurugi, which becomes one of the 3 imperial regalia of Japan, sacred objects that symbolize the legitimacy of the Japanese emperor to this day. Think about that chain of events. A banished god saves a girl by getting a dragon drunk, then pulls a sword out of its corpse that becomes a national treasure for over 1,000 years. The Yamata no Orochi represents something specific in Japanese mythology. It is nature at its most overwhelming, a force so vast and so alien that it can only be defeated through cleverness, not strength. Susanoo does not overpower the serpent. He outsmarts it. He exploits its appetites. In a culture that would go on to develop Bushido and the samurai code, the foundational myth of one of its greatest heroes involves a god who wins by pouring drinks. From a serpent that spans 8 mountains, we move to a dragon that spans the entire sky, one that does not destroy the world, but literally makes the rain fall to keep it alive. Chinese dragon. Shenlong is not a monster. It is a meteorological event with a consciousness. The Chinese dragon tradition is so fundamentally different from the Western model that using the same word for both feels almost dishonest. Where the European dragon hoards gold and burns villages, the Chinese dragon controls weather patterns, governs bodies of water, and serves as a direct link between the heavens and the earth. Shenlong, whose name translates roughly to spirit dragon or divine dragon, is specifically associated with wind, clouds, and rainfall, which in an agricultural civilization like ancient China meant it was associated with survival itself. No rain, no crops, no empire. The power of the Chinese dragon was not fire, it was food. Chinese dragons are typically depicted with long serpentine bodies, deer-like antlers, whiskers, 4-clawed feet, and no wings, because they do not need wings. They fly through divine power, riding the clouds and currents of the atmosphere. The number of claws on a Chinese dragon is a matter of serious cultural significance. 5-clawed dragons were reserved exclusively for the emperor. 4 claws indicated Korean or Indonesian dragon traditions. 3 claws were associated with Japanese depictions. If you were a commoner in Imperial China and you put a 5-clawed dragon on anything you owned, that was not a fashion choice. That was a death sentence. The Chinese dragon's association with imperial authority dates back at least to the Han Dynasty, around 200 BC, and intensified over the following 2,000 years until the dragon became the single most recognizable symbol of Chinese civilization. The dragon throne, the dragon robe, the dragon gate, all of these refer not to a feared monster, but to the highest expression of legitimate power and cosmic harmony. Shenlong specifically carried an additional layer of reverence and caution. Folklore held that if humans offended Shenlong, the consequence was drought, flood, or devastating storms. The dragon did not attack out of malice. It reacted to imbalance. If the world was in harmony, the rains came gently and the harvests flourished. If the world was in disorder, the dragon expressed that disorder through natural catastrophe. It was a cosmic feedback mechanism, and you did not want to be on its bad side. During drought periods in Imperial China, elaborate rituals and ceremonies were performed specifically to appease Shenlong and request rain. Dragon dances, some involving over 100 performers and a dragon figure up to 70 meters long, were not entertainment. They were prayers. And they still echo in Chinese New Year celebrations around the world today, where the dragon dance remains one of the most iconic elements, a direct cultural descendant of ancient rain rituals performed to honor a divine serpent that held the fate of entire harvests in its claws. The Chinese dragon is proof that the same word can mean completely opposite things, depending on which civilization you ask. In Europe, dragon means danger. In China, dragon means balance. From a dragon that maintained cosmic order, we leap to one that literally created it. A feathered serpent who was not just a god, but the architect of civilization itself. Aztec dragon. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, breaks every rule of what a dragon is supposed to be. It does not guard treasure. It does not terrorize villages. It does not breathe fire or demand sacrifice. Instead, it creates calendars, invents agriculture, gives humanity the knowledge of art and writing, and serves as the boundary between earth and sky, mortality and divinity. Quetzalcoatl's name comes from two Nahuatl words, Quetzal, referring to the resplendent Quetzal bird with its iridescent green tail feathers that can reach up to a meter in length, and Cotl, meaning serpent, a serpent covered in the most beautiful feathers in the Western Hemisphere. The image is intentionally paradoxical, a creature that belongs to the ground and the sky simultaneously, that combines the earthbound with the transcendent, that is both terrifying in its serpentine power and beautiful in its avian grace. Archaeologically, the feathered serpent appears far earlier than the Aztecs themselves. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent at Teotihuacan, one of the largest pyramids in the ancient city, dates to around 200 AD, centuries before the Aztec civilization even existed. The Olmecs, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, had serpent imagery as early as 1400 BC. By the time the Aztecs rose to power in the 14th century, Quetzalcoatl had been accumulating mythological significance for well over 2,000 years. He was a creator deity, credited with descending to the underworld to recover the bones of previous human races and sprinkling them with his own blood to create the current generation of humanity. He was a wind god, Ehecatl, whose breath set the sun in motion. He was a culture hero who taught the Toltecs how to cultivate maize and cacao and how to work jade and feathers into art. And in some traditions, he was a historical figure, a priest-king of Tula, who was tricked into drunkenness and shame by the dark god Tezcatlipoca and fled east across the sea, promising to return. When Hernán Cortés arrived on the eastern coast of Mexico in 1519, some accounts suggest that the Aztec emperor Moctezuma initially wondered if the feathered serpent had kept his promise, though modern historians debate how much of that narrative was constructed after the fact by Spanish chroniclers eager to justify the conquest. Regardless, Quetzalcoatl stands as one of the most complex dragon-adjacent figures in any mythology on Earth. It is not a beast to be slain, it is a principle to be understood. The dragon as teacher, the dragon as creator, the dragon as the thing that lifted humanity out of darkness and gave it the tools to build a civilization. From a god who built civilizations, we crash back down to Earth, literally, to a dragon who terrorized a single city and was killed not by a warrior, but by a shoemaker with a better understanding of chemistry than swordsmanship. Polish dragon. The Wawel dragon, known in Polish as Smok Wawelski, is the most working-class dragon in European mythology, and that is exactly why it endures. The legend centers on Kraków, one of the oldest and most important cities in Poland, and specifically on Wawel Hill, a limestone outcropping along the Vistula River where a royal castle has stood in some form since at least the 11th century. According to the most popular version of the story, a dragon lived in a cave beneath the hill and terrorized the city by devouring livestock, burning fields, and demanding that young women be sacrificed to it on a regular basis. King Krakus, the legendary founder of Kraków, offered his daughter's hand in marriage to whoever could defeat the beast, and naturally, every knight and warrior in the land showed up and failed spectacularly. Enter Scuba, a humble cobbler, a shoemaker, who decided that if swords could not kill the dragon, maybe a different approach could. He stuffed a lamb's skin with sulfur and left it outside the dragon's cave. The dragon ate it. The sulfur ignited inside its stomach. The creature drank so desperately from the Vistula River to quench the fire inside it that it literally drank until it exploded. A cobbler beat a dragon with a chemistry experiment disguised as lunch. This is why the Wawel dragon matters, because it is not a myth about gods or demigods or legendary heroes. It is a myth about a regular person outsmarting a problem that brute force could not solve. The people of Krakow still celebrate this story. A metal sculpture of the Wawel dragon sits at the base of Wawel Hill today, and it actually breathes fire, spitting a jet of natural gas every few minutes for tourists. The cave beneath the castle, known as the Dragon's Den, Smocha Jama, is a real geological formation that visitors can walk through, descending 65 steps into the limestone before emerging at the base of the hill along the river. The dragon is fake, the cave is real. The city built an identity around the intersection. The Polish dragon strips the archetype down to its most essential social function. It is not cosmic, it is not divine, it is not a metaphor for greed or chaos or the primordial ocean. It is a threat to a specific community, and the hero is not a prince or a god, but someone from that community who refuses to accept that the problem is unsolvable. That is a fundamentally democratic kind of mythology. From a dragon killed by cleverness and sulfur, we move to one that could not be killed at all, because it was not just a monster. It was evil itself, given 3 heads and a throne. Persian dragon. Ajidahaka is what happens when you take the concept of a dragon and fuse it with the concept of a tyrant, and then set the result on fire. In the Zoroastrian tradition, documented in the Avesta, the sacred scripture of Zoroastrianism, compiled over several centuries starting around the 1st millennium BC, Ajidahaka is a 3-headed, 6-eyed dragon created by Angra Mainyu, the supreme spirit of evil and destruction, as a weapon against everything good in the universe. This is not a dragon that chose to be bad. This is a dragon that was manufactured for the specific purpose of making the world worse. Each of its 3 mouths drips with venom and corruption. Its body is filled with lizards, scorpions, and snakes, so that even cutting it open releases more evil into the world. You cannot destroy it without consequence. You cannot contain it without vigilance. It is a theological weapon, a living argument for why the battle between good and evil never truly ends. In the Shahnameh, the great Persian epic composed by Ferdowsi around 1010 AD, Ajidahaka is reimagined as Zahak, a human king who is kissed on both shoulders by the devil, and from each kiss a serpent grows. These serpents must be fed human brains daily to keep them from consuming Zahak himself, which means his reign requires a constant supply of young people to be killed. The image is staggering. A king who stays alive by feeding his parasites the minds of his own subjects. That is not just a monster story. That is a political analysis. Zahak rules for 1,000 years before the hero Feridun overthrows him, but even then, Zahak cannot be killed. He is chained inside Mount Damavand, the highest peak in Iran at 5,610 meters, where he will remain until the end of the world, when he will break free and wreak havoc one final time before being destroyed forever. The Persian dragon is eschatological. It exists not just in the past but in the future. It is a promise that evil is patient, that it waits, that chains can hold it, but nothing short of the apocalypse can end it. That is a level of narrative ambition that most modern fantasy franchises cannot even approach. Ajidahaka makes every other dragon on this list look like a pet with behavioral issues. And yet, long before Persia gave evil 3 heads, an even older civilization was wrestling with serpents in the clouds. In a myth so ancient, it predates written history as we know it. Hittite dragon. Iluyanka belongs to a world so old that the mythology feels alien. The Hittite Empire flourished in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, between roughly 1600 and 1178 BC, making it contemporary with New Kingdom Egypt and Mycenaean Greece. Their myths survive on clay tablets written in cuneiform, fragments of stories that were ancient even when the scribes carved them. Iluyanka is a serpentine dragon associated with storms and chaos, and its primary narrative involves a conflict with the storm god, one of the chief deities of the Hittite pantheon. The myth exists in two versions, both recorded during the Hittite festival of Puruli, a spring celebration meant to ensure agricultural fertility. In the first version, the storm god fights Illuyanka and loses. A goddess named Inara devises a plan to defeat the dragon by hosting a massive feast and inviting Illuyanka to eat and drink until it is so bloated it cannot move. Then a mortal man ties the dragon down, and the storm god returns to kill it. If that plot sounds familiar, it should. A dragon defeated by overindulgence and trickery. The same basic structure appears in the Japanese myth of Yamata no Orochi, recorded over 2,000 years later. Either humans across cultures independently arrive at the same solutions to the same imaginary problems, or these story patterns are much older than any single civilization and travel through oral traditions across continents and millennia. The second version of the Illuyanka myth is darker and stranger. The dragon defeats the storm god and steals his heart and eyes. The storm god then has a son with a mortal woman, and this son marries the dragon's daughter. Through this marriage, the son gains access to the dragon's lair and recovers his father's heart and eyes. The storm god, restored to full power, kills Illuyanka, but then also kills his own son, who begs for mercy because he had sworn loyalty to the dragon's family. The god kills his own child to complete his revenge. That is not a fairy tale. That is a tragedy about the cost of cosmic justice, about how even divine victories require sacrifices that leave the victor diminished. The Hittite dragon myth is 3,500 years old, and it contains more moral complexity than most stories written last week. From storms and gods and stolen hearts in Bronze Age Anatolia, we now go all the way back, past every civilization on this list, past every written word, to the place where dragons started. To the dragon that was not even a dragon, because it was the ocean before the world existed. Sumerian dragon. Tiamat is not a dragon in any conventional sense, and calling her one almost feels disrespectful to the scale of what she represents. In the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic composed sometime around the 12th century BC, but drawing on Sumerian traditions that are centuries older, Tiamat is the primordial ocean. She is salt water. Her consort Apsu is fresh water. When they mingle, creation begins. She is not a character in the story of the universe. She is the medium from which the story of the universe is written. Everything starts with her, but creation produces gods, and gods produce noise, and noise disturbs Apsu, who decides to destroy his own offspring. When the younger gods kill Apsu in self-defense, Tiamat is enraged. She transforms. She creates 11 monsters to serve as her army, creatures so terrifying that the younger gods cower before them. She takes a new consort named Kingu and gives him the Tablet of Destinies, a divine object that grants supreme authority over the cosmos. Tiamat becomes war itself. The only god brave enough to face her is Marduk, a young deity who demands supreme power in exchange for fighting on behalf of the pantheon. The deal is made. Marduk rides into battle against Tiamat, and the fight that follows is not a skirmish. It is a cosmological event. Marduk catches the winds in a net and drives them into Tiamat's open mouth, inflating her body until she cannot move. Then he fires an arrow through her distended belly and splits her in two. From one half of her corpse, he makes the sky. From the other half, he makes the earth. The rivers flow from her eyes. The mountains rise from her body. The world you are standing on, according to this myth, is built from the butchered remains of a dragon goddess who was once the entire ocean. Tiamat is not a monster that threatens a city or a kingdom, or even a civilization. Tiamat is a monster that precedes civilization. She is pre-creation chaos, the formless void from which ordered reality must be violently extracted. Every dragon on this list, every fire-breather, every treasure hoarder, every storm serpent and feathered god is a descendant of this idea. The idea that before there was a world, there was a dragon, and the world only exists because something had the courage to tear that dragon apart and build something new from the pieces. Tiamat is the reason the word dragon has power in every language on earth. She is the original, and the originals never really die. If that does not make you want to look at every dragon story differently from now on, nothing will. Drop a comment with which dragon blew your mind the most, hit subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.